For the past 30 years, Mexico has gone through a very concerning situation: the possibility of a dual system between the Mexican government and the Ejército Zapatista de Liberación Nacional. For this dialogue, the roles taken are shown in the screen, and of course, each participation will have a proper replica that will lead us to a final proposal at the end. Starting with Anna. Anna, what aspects do you think are necessary to take into account in order to answer this question?
Distinguished representatives of the government, esteemed members of international organizations, and all those who stand for justice and equality. Today, I speak not as an adversary, but as a messenger of hope and as a voice for indigenous people of this land. We stand before you, not with blame, but with a call for action, a call to build a just and lasting peace together based on respect, understanding, and shared humanity. Let us recognize that peace cannot thrive where rights are denied and dignity is overlooked. Together, let us create a new path forward. That's why we need you to recognize our autonomy. To the government, we ask for acknowledgement of our self governance. The Caracoles, our autonomous territories, are not acts of rebellion. They are declarations of dignity and self determination. To international organizations, your advocacy for autonomy and support is ensuring that its recognition are crucial for peace. Second, enforce and expand indigenous rights. We know that the promises of 2001 constitutional reform remain unfulfilled. We called for mechanisms to uphold these rights and to align the national policies with international commitments like ILO Convention 169. To international organizations, your role in monitoring this commitment and holding Mexico accountable is essential. The third, safeguard our lands and sovereignty. Our land is more than just a resource, it is our history and our future. We urge the government to prioritize land redistribution and halt corporate exploitation. International organizations help us mediate these efforts and ensure that sustainability and respect guide us all development. Fourth, they militarize our territories. Military presence in our communities foster fear, not peace. We urge the government to withdraw forces and invest in indigenous led security initiatives. International organizations, we count on you to observe, report, and advocate for non-violent solutions. The fifth point, invest in education and infrastructure. We know that true peace requires opportunity. That's why we need to that the government invest in schools that honor our language, healthcare that reaches all, and infrastructure that uplifts without erasing our identity. International organization partner with us to design sustainable programs that respect our values. And finally, let us engage in dialogue. Intercultural dialogue is a bridge to understanding. The government creates spaces where indigenous leaders and officials can collaborate as equals. The international organizations support these efforts and share global best practices to ensure these conversations lead to a tangible result. Peace is not merely the absence of conflict, it is the presence of justice, equality, and mutual respect. Together we can build a Mexico where every voice is heard and every life is valued. Let us begin today. An indigenous community would love to hear what arguments and proposals you have. Thank you.
Good points. And now, I would like to ask the Mexican government, what do you think?
Thank you, Daphne. As the government representatives, we hear what Anna says, and we also recognize that the gap between the constitutional recognition of indigenous rights and the challenges of implementing the measures to completely eradicate any signs of inequality is quite large. This is why, learning from the past, we now understand the importance and the urgency of addressing the systematic inequalities and the lack of representation that eventually led to the events highlighted by other members of this discussion. Those events showed us the consequences of marginalization and the need for meaningful dialogue and action, and we, as the government representatives, are committed to strengthen our commitment to ensure these proposals are met, as well as bridging the gap between any organizations and our communities. And by doing this, we hope to create a more inclusive country where diversity is celebrated. Now, Luis will tell you more about our proposals.
In addition to what has been said, as a government, we believe that a modern state must be built on respect, inclusion, and collaboration. We recognize that for years indigenous people have been marginalized, and this cannot be changed with words alone, but with concrete actions. That is why, in order to build a solid society, A modern state must recognize cultural diversity as a national wealth. This implies to stop seeing cultural homogeneity as an ideal. Each language, tradition, and indigenous worldview is an essential part of who we are as a country. Guarantee the self-determination of indigenous people. We recognize the legitimacy of their autonomous territories, and we are working on legal framework to ensure that they can coexist in harmony with the national system, without impositions or restrictions. We also need to prioritize equity in access to resources and rights, since the state must invest more in the infrastructure, education, and health in indigenous communities, ensuring that public policies are designed in consultation with the communities to address their specific needs. As well, promote permanent intercultural dialogue, because this dialogue should not be limited to moments of crisis. It should be constant, inclusive, and representative of all voices. A modern state cannot impose solutions without listening to those who have historically been excluded. Like the indigenous community, we are willing to collaborate to generate a proposal that recognizes and ensures the rights of all.
Thank you, Luis. I consider you and Anna's participation are quite important insights. What attitudes should we implement to solve the problem? However, it's important not to only look into the future but also into the past. That's why we are passing on to my participation in the antagonism formulated between the two parties. The animosity between the two started from the modifications made to the points agreed on in the past. The government tried to renegotiate what already been established, not only with Carlos Salinas but also with Ernesto Cedillo and Vicente Fox. At the time Vicente Fox released his law, Ley para las Lenguas Indígenas, none of the essence from the first document were present. This stagnant process were used as an excuse for the government to not longer advance, but actually it was the rejection of the indigenous communities to not accept what has not been established. Why am I even mentioning this? Because this is the main issue. With this, I offer 3 steps to reach an agreement. The first being no more historical and persistent denial of indigenous rights. The aftermath of the agreement went with a proper intercultural perspective and legal purity. What can we do? Well, Bill's proposal should be elaborated in relation to its very purpose, promoting a change. The ambiguity regarding what autonomy and pluralism implied were left to be defined by the state legislation. This means that the legal gaps became the government's perfect opportunity to stagnate the process and continue the abuses at a local level. No more of that. The second measure is that democracy is important for intercultural dialogue, since with this it's possible to provide a framework for inclusive participation, mutual respect, and the protection of diverse identities and voices, which means new ways of citizenships that can be reached. This is different from legal citizenships, different from being from the United States or different from being Mexican. No, no, no. Active citizenship implies working toward the betterment of one community through participation that permits the community to have well-being. That is why representation in political and public spaces is so important. The indigenous community up to this date has no public and political participation yet. And well, we reach the third point, the most important one. The things noted on the left at the bottom are the misconceptions created, formulated throughout time based on the issue mentioned before. Autonomy for the government might be translated as a way to end the control they have over indigenous community, as a way to end the control over natural resources, which is important because people there lived based on natural resources. However, not everything is so true, not everything is so limited as it seems. We have to take in mind listening for understanding. This is a lesson we pass through the course. This means that diversity and plurality viewpoints should be considered as wealth, not an obstacle. It's a misconception that the community wants to create a new state, wants to create a new way for to separate the national frontiers. They are not asking for anything other than the implementation of the rights granted to all the Mexicans in the Constitution. What the government thinks is that they want to balkanize the republic, since profound reforms would be necessary, when in reality it's more simple than that. Of course, this is not everything, and we have many areas of opportunity that can be covered. But of course, Miguel can tell us more about it. Miguel, what do you think about the question at the beginning and everything that has been said?
I really agree with the arguments that my teammates have said, and I also think that international organizations can play a critical role in supporting indigenous movements like the EZLN by actively participating in their causes. Beyond advocacy and monitoring human rights violations, which is very good, they should engage more directly by facilitating inclusive dialogues, mediating between indigenous communities and the state, and ensuring agreements that should be implemented fairly. They can fund and lead programs for cultural preservation, education, and sustainable economic development in marginalized areas. With that, by maintaining a more active presence, such as on the ground involvement in conflict resolution and policy implementation, they can ensure that indigenous rights are protected and also integrated into broader societal frameworks. Human Rights Watch, the United Nations, and Amnesty International have played pivotal roles in highlighting the importance of indigenous communities, particularly in the context of the Zapatista Army of National Liberation. These organizations work to protect human rights, ensure justice, and promote cultural equity. Firstly, Human Rights Watch (HRW) works to document human rights abuses, particularly violence and displacement affecting the indigenous communities in Chiapas. By exposing these violations, HRW holds the Mexican government more accountable and raises global awareness. Also, the United Nations promotes indigenous rights through frameworks like the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, made in 2007, and it encourages dialogue between the EZLN and the government, focusing on cultural respect, autonomy, and access to resources. And finally, in the case of Amnesty International, it advocates for the rights of indigenous people, highlighting abuses like repression and extrajudicial killings. And it uses global pressure to push for legal reforms and government accountability. Together, these organizations support indigenous communities by exposing abuses, promoting dialogue, and finally advocating for justice and equality for all.
Thank you for your contribution, Miguel. With this, it's time to pass on to our final proposal. Please, Miguel, tell us what is it?
After all the intercultural dialogue, we end up with the following proposal. The final proposal centers on a multilateral agreement to ensure peaceful communication and cooperation. The Mexican government must demilitarize Chiapas, while indigenous communities agree to demilitarize their borders as a gesture of non aggression. And toward indigenous communities, the government commits to fulfilling previous promises through a monitoring system to track progress. And this system would involve consulting indigenous communities to co create regulations tailored to their needs. And finally, international organizations will support this effort by developing programs that ensure indigenous communities access to education and technology, recognizing their autonomy and fundamental rights. And finally, this collaborative model fosters equity, respect, and long term stability.